Hi there, YouTubers. Life is beautiful, and yet there's always plenty of reasons to doubt it. Look at the suffering that marks, shepherds and guides the process of evolution, especially according to its neo-Darwinian survival of the fittest distortion. This version of the theory of evolution way too uncritically marginalizes the beauty of altruistic cooperation while raising rampant competitive individualism onto a central pedestal. From here throughout the 20th century, it was used to sanctify inhumanity, greed, and cruelty, till today, selfish, cutthroat jungle metaphors render silent what should be loud and justified outrage against the robber barons of Wall Street, or denial of health cover to those deemed unfit for survival. Thankfully, not an idea that has much credibility here in New Zealand. Here I'm a beneficiary of collective altruism as I battle or learn to live or die with cancer. Yeah, life can be cruel, but in spite of this, as we struggle to escape from under the hooves of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, pestilence, war, famine and death, horrors you'd think that would make most of us want to crawl into a hole and pull the earth down upon our heads. Instead, recalling another origin myth, we find huddled at the bottom of Pandora's box of mixed blessings one last gift: unquenchable hope. This unquenchable hope, apparently hardwired into us from the start, energises quite diverse worldviews, from joyous belief in a personal God who will rescue us from life's woes and pile riches on our heads, to hope in an agnostic rationalism in which man is the measure of all things, free of religious dogma or New Age naivety or other Pollyanna nonsense. We act as if these were quite opposite. Like all dualities, though, they're closer than the proponents of each camp are willing to concede. These are, in fact, instinctive or archetypal reactions to events, the way our psyches construct meaning out of experience. Archetypes which, as Carl Jung taught us, are imagined quite differently in different psyches, but with the same sense-giving potential that we find a reason to hope. The question that I always find most interesting and fascinating is not what I or others believe, but what holding these beliefs does for us, what archetypal energy is satisfied by these beliefs. After 14 billion years or so, in this species, reflexive consciousness has emerged from stardust. The emergent process is evolution, and the stimulus response structures in single-celled animals to the complex chemicals in human brains. Behaviours have been moulded and shepherded with pleasure and pain-inducing chemicals, neurotransmitters like oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, to encourage a favourable behaviour or repress an unfavourable one. And at the experiential level, the subjective, where the rubber hits the road, where life is lived, this is the stuff of life, from the greatest joy to the most withering tragedy, grist to the mill of a Shakespeare or a Schubert or a Shrek. Now, along with hope, what we find everywhere is a capacity for joy, sheer raw delight in our lived experiences, in the stream of sense perceptions that flood into us from our projected environment. And this is the reason why, despite the irrationality of plodding on through life's joys till they whimper to an end with violence, heartbreak, ill health or death, as they all must, still knowing this, almost none of us voluntarily hand back our life memberships. Instead, we cling with an almost indecent desperation if it looks like that membership will be revoked, as indeed we all know it must. So what about those of us who have had advance notice of the cancellation of our membership? For example, a diagnosis of cancer. Even in the bite of what should, from the outside, seem enough to set a flood of terror neurotransmitters, hardly any remain overwhelmed by fear. They find inner resilience, strength, grace. It's the rule rather than the exception. So for me, Now, with the return of cancer that will probably kill me one day, I still easily feel positive, and not positively pasted together by hopes of a divine rescue plan or eternal after party. Clearly, the angel of death has gifts that we have forgotten about, gifts we desperately need to rediscover as we tear ourselves apart and each other in our Beckeresque death-denying contortions. See my video on Ernest Becker called Evolve Past This. I begin to see why the most profound spiritual practices in the past have involved developing an intimacy with death. We realize somehow that the lessons of death can come in its embrace, not in its denial or refusal. When we learn to go easy into that good night, we, like Dylan Thomas, can cease raging against the dying of the light, as he did in his later and lesser-known poem, Elegy. Death is an important sense, it's profoundly mundane, something we all come to. Life, after all, is a terminal disease. In W.B. Yeats's words, consume my heart away, sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. So how can death's presence, even in its denial, be made to yield its lesson of liberation? What is that lesson which most profound traditions of humanity have developed to help prise loose our terror grip on life and avoid the contortions described by Becker, in which are tearing humanity apart? Isn't death denial and terror hardwired into us, unavoidable? No, I don't think so. I think it's more likely the result of the unskillful use of the latest add-on to consciousness to emerge in evolution. That's self-reflexivity. As far as we know, only humans not only know, but know that we know, and can, through our inner narratives, imagine our removal in a not-at-hand future. This gives rise to faulty thinking meant to arm us against the feared unknown. But what if we turn toward death? What if we open our arms to his embrace? Can we break the fear-fueled stranglehold that we have on the future? Quieten the words of warning and escape? Live open-handedly, dying in every moment, letting it be? If not, we share and are infected by the worldview that so desperately denies death that it continually fabricates eternal life fantasies and grabs every resource the earth has to lengthen life, even if only as a silicon-stuffed, incontinent, animated cadaver. Our seeing death as a defeat rather than a victory means our relationship to it is sick, and we lose sight of the appropriateness of it and its harbingers, old age and disease. The great classical poet Virgil describes the River Lethe, the river of forgetting, as the final river in the underworld journey towards the Elysian fields, where one loses all memory of one's earthly life, and where ego gets extinguished before death. The place of no return. I count myself lucky to have walked out on the banks of the Lethe and with a return ticket. There we feel the white-knuckled grip on life loosening and feel the loving embrace of life in its fullness. Consider this fantasy. An angel of death comes for you, takes you, you arrive at the next world, and you plead with the gatekeeper, just another month or just another year, or even another week. Now imagine him saying, okay then, see you in 2 years. In a way, that's what happens to people with eternal diagnosis, or at least that's what I made of mine. Death delayed. How good is that? Have some free time, another month, maybe a year, maybe a decade, who knows? This gift of more time to see to important things that were always pushed aside by the urgent things in my life, to live consciously, lighten my footprint on the earth, cut my workload, practice simplicity, discover life's generosity, see to my spiritual and intellectual and creative life. For me, these are the gifts of death awareness.